Y Media has newspaper, midweek, radio, South Asian pop.
Hi, I'm Amitabh Bachchan and you're listening to South Asian Pulse.
Hi, this is Amir Khan and you're listening to South Asian Pulse.
All English 24/7 television network and Y Media Plus.
You are watching Channel Y. Channel Y.
Y Media Group's Ground Zero Report. From Parliament Hill to Queen's Park, to Y Media's studios.
Prime Minister, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back.
Y Media is the official media partner for TIFF. Is an exclusive show all about the Toronto International Auto Show.
So Cam's going to tell us more about the amazing vehicle.
Hi, this is Yalla Kampal with Y Media. Today we are here at the 2023 Canadian International Auto Show. We're going to
Hi, I'm Ria Khan, and on behalf of Y Media, welcome to Channel Y.
Y Media Group welcomes you to Channel Y once again.
Host Ramona Singh, and it's always great to start the show with you.
Hi everybody, this is Yalla Kampal with Y Media. Today
Channel Y के entertainment special में जहाँ
Hello, Sat Shri Akal, Namaste and Adab. This is Kripa Anand and you're watching us on Channel Y.
Everyone, this is Pragya Devan and you're watching me on Y Media.
This is Vinay Sharma, reporting from Chandigarh, Channel Y.
Online, SouthAsianDaily.com, the biggest South Asian media group. Y Media.
Jaswal. I'm the group editor at Y Media. And once again, we are back here with our program, our weekly roundup, Y Media Newsroom. At Y Media Newsroom, we'll be discussing the issues that everyone is asking. One of the big questions that everyone is discussing, can US annex Canada? And we've listened one of the audio leaks from our Prime Minister Trudeau. What did he have to say? They were saying, you know, it was just merely a joke that was being said earlier that US President Donald Trump, at that time he was the president-elect, when he first raised the question of Canada becoming the 51st state of US. But it's not a joke anymore. Can it become a reality? What's the end game here? What does US want? If you can recall, we did talk a lot about this last week, and I was again and again alluding towards this side to our co-host Ramona ji. Let me welcome her, and then we'll talk more not only about US, Canada, but we'll also talk about can US or does US have the plans to own Gaza, because that's what Trump said, not just that he said, he doubled down the very next day that yes, that's what the plan is. Benjamin Netanyahu, that this must be music to his ears. What's the plan in Middle East as far as US is concerned? We'll talk about that. Also, we'll talk about China U.S. relationship. India will definitely talk because Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he is visiting U.S. So welcome in the White House for Narendra Modi after Benjamin Netanyahu. So what is the policy here? After Netanyahu, White House is ready to welcome Narendra Modi there. And he's also visiting France as well. So India-France relationship, India-US relationship, China-India relationship, US-China relationship, Russia-US. What's the equation there? But most importantly, we'll talk about Canada and US. To talk about all this and also to give her analysis, we have our co-host Ramona. Ramona, a very warm welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. You know, remember last week we were talking about all this, that yes, there is something going on, and here we have this audio leak. Was this a leak or was this planted purposely? There are news stories planted purposely as well. So I think Prime Minister Trudeau, he doesn't have much to lose. So here is what he clearly mentioned to the leaders in the business community. I mean, you have the CEO of Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, many business leaders present over there, and the audio got leaked to media as well, where Trudeau clearly saying this. It's not a joke. Trump is serious when he's talking about making Canada the 51st state. What do they want from Canada? But before we get into that, I want to hear your reaction on this whole scenario.
You know, these are times that I think many people are scratching their heads, wondering what's happening. There is news coming from every angle. You know, every day you wake up and then there's some new headline, breaking news coming out of the White House. It's a fast-paced environment. There's a lot being said right now. And, you know, I think from everywhere around the world, and more specifically Canadians, you know, this past couple of weeks have been very hard, I think, for Canadians with their relationship with the United States, always looking at the United States as a neighbor, a friendly neighbor. It is a destination where Canadians travel to when it comes for vacation, family members. On the other side, you go to school in the United States, work, all kinds of things. And so, you know, I think most Canadians have also seen more U.S. cities versus the rest of the beauty of Canada, because sometimes it's, you know, a lot cheaper to go down to those destinations. So, you know, this is a time where Canadians have been scratching their heads thinking, what's going on? Why would we hear something like this from the White House in terms of threatening us about annexing Canada to make it into the 51st state, which is very bizarre types of comments, but even going as far as to call the Prime Minister the governor, as if it's Canada's a state. And then when the 25% talks of tariffs really came down on February 1st, which we covered for you live here in Y Media, and 10% on Canadian energy exports, this was a time where, you know, President Trump also went on his social media, Truth Social, saying that, you know, Canada's a failed nation. We've been subsidizing them, talking about the trade deficit, which, you know, was an inflated number. And the reason that's the case is because Canada does sell its crude oil to the United States, actually from Alberta. It goes to the United States, gets refined there, and it sells it below market rate. And if that was not part of the case, then there would be a surplus. So there's so many things that were said that I think, you know, Canadians feel not just hurt by, but also I think this is, in a way, a blessing in disguise, because now the conversation has shifted here in Canada about how Canada can be more independent, how Canada needs to have a strategy from east to west when it comes to critical energy, when it comes to its trade relations between the different provinces and territories. So this is a time where now everyone's really taking part of this. And I have to go back to, you know, the great words of President Kennedy when he said, it's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. And I think that's the conversation we're having now as Canadians, is what can we do for this great country in terms of making sure that it's a place that is not only a great place to live and it's secure, you know, especially with what the latest things about the border, but also it's a place where you invest, and it's a place where you can grow, and it's a great country where you can have a good standard of living and, of course, a free country.
Yeah, the only concern being one of the major concerns is because when Prime Minister, I know we've been discussing this right from the start, but when our Prime Minister Trudeau and his cabinet ministers, when they went for, you know, a dinner with President Trump, that time what was happening was that Trump brought it up, and that Canada could become the 51st state. And then they knew that this could get serious. But then, when they came back, so it was asked to our finance minister, Dominic LeBlanc, as well, even Trudeau, Minister LeBlanc, they were all saying, no, this is just a joke. He was just cracking a joke. But now Prime Minister himself is the first time Prime Minister Trudeau, among all these business leaders, he has said it explicitly that yes, US is serious, Trump is serious when it comes to, making Canada its 51st state. And he clearly said it, that they want our critical minerals. That's what they want, and the resources. We have lots of resources, and they're very crucial to US. We are sending them nickel, we are sending them potash, we are sending them uranium. They need all these things. Uranium for their energy needs. Of course, for their energy needs, we are sending them oil as well. Oil is also very important for them. But when we're talking about critical minerals, so these are all the things that they need. Potash, they need it for their agriculture. So I would say a vast majority of all these three and other critical minerals, they're all exported to US from Canada. So, and this is what last week as well, Prime Minister said it just now, but last week I was trying to bring the discussion more and more towards this. I know you were answering something, then I would say it again, no, what is the end game? I clearly think it's, and Prime Minister Trudeau didn't use this word, but I'll say this, I think it's a question of sovereignty. That's what I was talking last week as well. That now I think it's a question of sovereignty for Canada. We are a sovereign nation, we are a free country. But even if we do not become the 51st state, I think the way the US administration or the way Trump looks at it, they would want that yes, more or less, Canada should be our ally. If we say you need to ramp up your defense budget, Canada should do that. If we are going at war with any country, Canada should join us without asking any questions. If US wants any critical minerals, they should be at their disposal without asking any questions. And, it's not a question of fentanyl, it's not a question of illegal immigrants, because I don't think so that could be an issue, but that was never the main issue that we're trying to address here. And also, when they say we need a new SAR for, drug control, fentanyl control. So, I think Canada is already, trying to discuss what is this new SAR would do. We already have a chief who takes care of illegal drugs being transported. So we already have things in place. And then they were saying, okay, fine, the tariffs have taken a pause for 30 days. The second decision that we have made is 1.3 million for border. We at Y Media covered on 17th of December. That was already announced. And then when they say, okay, fine, would you list the Mexican cartels as terrorists? How many Mexican cartels are operating over here? They could be operating from Mexico, but how many Mexican cartels are being persecuted here in Canada? How many of them, their cases are in front of courts that we say, oh, Mexican cartel, you're a drug lord? Okay, we'll label you as terrorist. I haven't covered anybody up until now in the last 24 years. So we say, okay, we'll do that. So all these things were pretty much already there. So I don't think so any of these three issues was a major issue. These are issues. But I think the end game is they want to throw down their weight, and the US establishment, and it's not about Canada. And we've also heard those responsible for putting tariffs on Canada, they clearly want an aggressive posturing there. So they clearly want to send Canada a message that yes, you have to, if you're taking advantage. And I just want to bring another point as well, which I was already discussing earlier as well. There have been many discussions, like Trump says, it's a $200 billion deficit. No, it's not. Secondly, you've always been in trade deficit for the last 50 years. You tell me 10 years, 20 years ago, were you ever in trade surplus? No, you weren't. Then another question would be that do you think that yes, Canada, as there is mentioning, it's a charity case, and they told Trudeau at that time that you would cease to exist. It's an existential threat for you if we stop supporting you. So I don't think so. As far as I read Financial Times every day, if I get a chance, I'll read Wall Street Journal as well. I'll read many other business publications. I watch that. I don't think so. Canada is a charity case. We can certainly, even if we stop doing any trade with the US right now, we'll still survive. It will be very difficult. Canada, we're a small country. We're not even a $4 trillion or a $3 trillion economy. But we're still there in the top 10. We'll still do trade with many other countries. We still have so many things. So I think we will do well. Actually, if you ask me, let me say this today. I think, and it's a very bold statement, but I'll make it. I think Canada will be better off in case tariffs apply. If tariffs don't apply, we definitely want it this way. That's fine. But if tariffs come in play, 25% tariffs or even 10% on the oil, I think Canada would be better off, and I've been listening this from the last more than 2 decades that Canada wants to diversify its trade. We haven't been able to do that, but if at all we're able to do that, Canada would be better off if tariffs come into play.
Okay, so let's talk about endgame. Right now, the home that you live in, and you have no intention of selling your home, can someone come and buy your home if you have no intention of selling it?
That's a good question. It's not a question because right now it's a matter of an entire country here. And you're right. It's very difficult to buy a home if the seller is not interested.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's the case with Canada as well. But there is a difference. I'll talk 2 points on this one. First one, yes, countries do next. Like what Ukraine is trying to fight hard, but here comes Russia. Attack on Georgia in 2008. Crimea, 2014. Again, this is almost a third attack by Russia on Ukraine. So they're trying to fight hard, but it's difficult. Here is Israel. Not just one home, millions and millions of homes. I mean, look, now they're talking, we'll talk about that further, but countries do next. I mean, if China is going to take over Taiwan, US might, there could be an escalation of war, but tomorrow, okay, let me be the devil's advocate here. Tomorrow, if US decides that yes, we are coming for Canada, we're coming for Canada. I know it's very hard to believe, but it was hard to believe earlier as well that someone like when Trump will come to power, he'll start calling Canada as the 51st state, he'll start calling Prime Minister of an ally country the governor of the 51st state. But yes, tomorrow, if push comes to shove, yes, will say, okay, fine. I mean, obviously, and you know what? He did talk about the 1803 Accord between Canada and US, and he did mention that, Trump. Now, that's also coming out. And please don't quote me, I'm quoting Robert Fife here. I mean, the guy who's been an Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. So I'm just quoting him. So whatever I've read or whatever I'm talking, so because I wasn't privy to the meeting there, what happened there, but these are all very well-known journalists. So how, like US, it was part of Philadelphia, New York State, and all these states. But then what did they do? I mean, they started buying or annexing different parts of US, even California for that matter. California was part of Mexico. So this is how, and then they took over California, Texas, buying from some places and annexing, taking over. That's how US has become the country it is today, and then taking over Hawaii. And they're ready to take over other things. If there is one word, and I've been saying this for many years, if there is one word for foreign policy, what is that one word for foreign policy for everyone, especially for Russia, China, India, US, Israel? What is that one word? Expansion, whether in terms of trade or in terms of territory. Has any of these major countries ceded any territory to any of the other countries? Absolutely not. What is the main issue between China and India? Border dispute. Other than that, yeah, there are a few other conflicts as well, but mainly border dispute. So, as much as, it's I don't want to say that, but maybe U.S. could think that, okay, in worst case scenario, we would want to annex or take over Canada. Please.
So to my point about the end game of someone, right? So if somebody they love your home and they want to take it over and they say, I want to buy your home, and you say, it's not for sale. I like living here. I don't plan on selling it to you. So under what circumstances would you be pressured to sell your home if you don't want to? It's if you haven't managed your home. If you, let's just say, have a mortgage that you haven't been able to pay, if you can't keep up with the finances, and then the pressure builds up, and then you are in a situation where then you have to sell your home. Now, maybe not even at the market value, maybe because of the pressures of not managing the finances of that property, you might have to even sell it quickly, and you might have to sell it at a discounted rate. So now that would be an indication of what's been happening in Canada politically, right, when it comes to the Canadian landscape. This was a rude awakening call for Canada on many different ways. We have the Liberal government that's been in place since 2015, and I have to say, I have not seen that much activity as I have seen in the last 2 weeks, and more specifically in the last week. I mean, as we speak right now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is resigning as of March 9th, when there is a new Liberal leader and a new Prime Minister, he's on his way to the European Union, he's on his way to Europe, and Mary Ng, the trade minister, she's on her way, she's in Europe, and then she's going to go to Pacific Asia. We've had trade agreements since the Harper government. The question remains is, have we been actively working with all our trade partners? And this is something that we've seen even with this Canada-U.S. sort of summit that was held in Toronto just yesterday, where what you're referring to, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was caught off on a hot mic talking about how serious Trump is about trying to absorb Canada. And of course he had, his sleeves rolled up like he's, hard at work. And we've seen him probably work a lot this week that we haven't seen otherwise. And, all of a sudden the Liberal government's tune is changing on when it comes to carbon tax, when it comes to Canadian energy, when it comes into investing, when it comes into the border, when it comes to meeting the, NATO target of 2% GDP. So all of this is now all of a sudden switching from the likes of, Chrystia Freeland, who's been at the helm of many things, including finance minister, now saying that, Canada could meet the NATO target as early as 2027. So it's an interesting time for a government, and her, going back on the carbon tax and everything else. It's a very interesting time for a government that's been there for about a decade, and so much has changed in terms of the Canadian geopolitical scene, in terms of Canadian population, and everything in between. So usually, yes, you are going to be forced to sell your home when you don't want to, if you have not kept up with the affairs of what you're supposed to. So I go back to the statement of, it's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. And this conversation is now coming to the topic because now Canadians are thinking, well, what do we need, right? Interprovincial trade is a massive issue. We have Anita Anand, who's now saying that this could be done, from anywhere from 10 days to 30 days. This has been a conversation for decades in terms of the different provinces being able to trade with one another. She talked about productivity increasing. She talked about what it means for trade within the country. So there's so many things that shows that could have been done. It just wasn't. Perhaps the ruling parties had different ideas about what Canada should be, but it cannot be said that we weren't sleeping at the wheel. And I think it's a collective responsibility. But even now we're hearing from Karina Gold saying, we weren't listening to Canadians, right? It's very easy to say after the fact, oh, we weren't listening. Our prime minister had to step down. We have, the U.S., our biggest trading partner, saying these things. So in a way, this is good that it's happening. Now the conversation is turning into, how can Canada be able to be in a situation where it has other trade agreements? It has trade agreements. It needs to trade. Suncor, CEO of Suncor just said that 60 to 65% of its oil goes out. It goes to Asian markets. Right now, the TMX, the pipeline that goes from Alberta to Vancouver and then to the Asian markets, they're looking at increasing their supply. So now Canada's becoming very strategic, saying, why should our biggest customer be the United States, and they buy it at a discount from the market rate, and now they're slapping us back in our face, right? Why should Quebec and Ontario be powered by Alberta Energy, but it goes into the United States and then back into, it's the Line 5, Enbridge Line 5 that goes into Canada and Quebec. And even so, the Premier of Quebec, Legault, is saying, before he was against pipelines in Quebec, now he's saying, we're open to talking about it. So all of a sudden, everyone had a wake-up call. They woke up with not just cold water to the face, but maybe a punch in the face, a kick in the gut. And I said it and then a kick from behind saying, what are we doing here? When did we become so complacent, right? We have a trade agreement, okay. And then we have all these values of no pipelines in my province, no pipelines east to west, where, Western Canada cannot provide energy to Eastern Canada. We had all of these, sort of ideologies and against our values. What happened? Trump sends out a few, posts on Truth Social, and then says a couple of things in the news, and all of a sudden our values have shifted. And now I'm talking more specifically to the politicians who have been in power and who've been driving the Canadian agenda all of these years to bring us to where we are right now. So what happens when somebody has an end game and you want to have your own end game? This is the conversation we're having now. You're right. The United States, here's the list. 1803, they bought Louisiana for $15 million. In 1818, the Red River, which is from the border, they established that. Florida, they bought it for $5 million in 1819. The Canada-U.S. relationship goes back to the time where, these were colonies. There was the 13 colonies in the United States, and then of course their expansion happened. And when they went through their civil revolution here in Canada, we had Upper Canada, Lower Canada, which is essentially Ontario and Quebec. And when they went through their civil revolution and wanted to separate from England, Canada wanted to stay within England, and they called us the Loyalists. And then, that's when they wanted to come to the border. Now, do I believe in this day and age that they are going to bring their troops to our border? This is going to be a very shocking scene to see something like that, more specifically because we know, if we can tell anything from history, President Trump doesn't go to war when it comes to sending troops. What he does is he uses sort of economic war, right? Whether he puts in embargoes, he puts in tariffs, he puts in whatever the case is. It's more economical, right? Which hurts in many ways. He doesn't necessarily send troops to places. If anything, he's been talking about, but he's not a predictable guy. But if we can look at his history, that's not the kind of guy. So can we actually see tanks rolling up? And would all the different House of Representatives, with the Senate, would everybody be up for, and will the American population, would they be, because really the government functions if there is consensus with the population, right? And if there is no consensus, I can't imagine tanks rolling up to the border. It is the biggest border. And what is Canadian response? But I'm not saying we should never think about, in terms of Canadian military. I'm not saying we shouldn't think. That's absolutely a situation, because we haven't, also under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we haven't invested in our military. We haven't invested in really anything in that sense. So now that we see him with his sleeves rolled up, like he's in an election cycle and he's doing this and that, too late for what he's done. Mind you, I think Canada handled it very well with what he did on February 1st in terms of response, in terms of the 25% on the on American goods that are being imported into Canada. Now let's talk about that. What would that look like if there is, let's just say in these 30 days, March 4th is the 30-day hold off. Let's say in these 30 days, Canada can't come to terms with the United States, with President Trump. Now, even if Canada says, you know what, we'll immediately, increase our defense spending for NATO and put our contribution of 2% GDP. We will do X, Y, Z. Let's just say some of these things are discussed and still it's a no-go. Well, what would happen is immediately the Canadian dollar will take a massive dive, right? And in a way, it would be even cheaper to export. So will the Americans get hurt when we also put in our, when they put our 25% tariffs on our exports to the United States? It may be able to be absorbed, but what will that do for the Canadian economy? If we also have the 25% tariff on American goods, it affects produce. 20% of our produce in this country is from other countries. That's going to be immediately hit. And so many other things. I mean, when I looked at the list of all the items that are going to be tariffed on for American items that are imported to Canada, it was just an endless amount of pages. Right, because Canada said it's going to be $155 billion where the tariffs are going to be applied to, with $30 billion to start with, and in another 3 weeks it'll be another, $125 billion that is going to take the 25% tariffs on it. That would be devastating for our economy. We've had the Bank of Canada talk about, our GDP could shrink, up to like 5 to 6%. And what also it means is, even though there is this delay, investment is not secure. Canada doesn't become a place, and the investments we lose from companies that would have otherwise invested in Canada, we would lose that completely, right? It doesn't mean it's not like COVID times where, there was a stay-at-home order, and then as soon as it's lifted, everybody goes back to work and the job numbers go up and down. Once when investments leave this country because it's unstable and it's not reliable, it's not to say they're going to come back. Right, we saw that happen with the pipelines, right? We saw that when there was the east to west pipeline, the amount of delays that were in place when the companies pulled out, they haven't put any applications in. So does that mean what was done in 2018, where the Canadian government bought Kinder Morgan to be able to finish, the pipeline, TMX pipeline from Kinder Morgan for was like $4.5 billion just to be able to finish from Alberta going to Vancouver so it could have access to Asian markets. It was, again, because of delays. So now the question remains, I know right now Canadians are looking at, buy Canadian products, very much averse to what the Americans are, President Trump, not Americans, what President Trump is saying. Will this conversation still be the case where then there would be more support for Canadian energy and enriching its minerals and having that sort of conversation with trade partners around the world? That's to be seen. I think right now things are moving so fast that it'll be very interesting to see where the movements are as we go into. It sounds like we're like nearing a federal election because of what these parties are doing, their announcements. We can get into that in more detail. So it's really going to be up to Canadians to see if this appetite that there is right now will still be the case in weeks or months to come.
Yeah, very good points that you've made. I'll start from this. So will this appetite continue? Will this buy Canadian or the patriotism that we're witnessing right now, will it still carry on?
Developing Canadian energy is what I'm talking about, the appetite.
Yeah. So, regarding developing Canadian energies, or if you're talking about east-west pipelines or refineries, I've always doubted that does it really make a business case now? Yes, I'm not sure about that, but of course, anyone who's going to make that sort of investment, putting up a pipeline, it's going to cost billions of dollars. So even if you want to build refineries right now, with many reasons, as I've discussed earlier as well, with the electric vehicles, more and more in demand. And I know you said, and you're right, the infrastructure still isn't in place, but we've had ambitious targets from many of the countries, many European countries. They've already had very ambitious targets. And I know infrastructure is going to take some time to develop, maybe 5 years, 10 years. So if I'm building a pipeline, spending billions of dollars, and imagine after 10 years, every single new car that is being produced in Canada, it's EV. We don't have any cars with internal combustion engines or any gasoline engines. So Where do I stand investing billions of dollars for pipelines or for oil refineries? That's the question. It might make a business case, but I doubt that. That's obviously you're right. It's a massive, it's not a wake-up call. It's a massive wake-up call for everyone. We were complacent. There was slackness. We were tapping on the wheel, whatever you want to put it. These are all understatements, mind you. These are all understatements. Why? Because, we're a G7 country. We're a G7 country. We are a rich country. There are many countries. Just day before yesterday, I was having a discussion with someone. They said, you know what, India is the 5th largest economy, and we're very soon going to be the 3rd largest. I said, yeah, I know. We're going to surpass Japan and Germany. Only US and China would be ahead of us. I know that. And I also know this thing is very, very, very well, that Indian economy would surpass US in the next 50 years. Everyone knows that. So India will be a bigger economy than US. China would be the number one, China being at 60 or 70 trillion dollar. And then you have US and Canada, the second one is 52 trillion. Everyone knows that. We've all seen those trajectories. But the question being, at what point the per capita income, because India and China, they have both populations close to 1.4 billion. So at one point, they say, no, the US has a lot of poverty. I said, yeah, I know. They said, come to US, you travel around different cities, there are people lying on sites. I said, you're right. And I know there's debt as well, the economy, it's a borrowed economy. We hear so many stories, but still, the US economy is doing well. Their job numbers are doing well. It's still per capita. It's definitely richer than even Canada. Even Australia is richer than Canada. Australia is richer than Canada in terms of per capita. So now, Canada being such a rich country, why didn't we act earlier? The question is right. And more so, I'll add another point to it. As the climate is changing, and we've always had discussions about this Arctic region. Russia is interested, China is interested, US is interested, Canada, how are we going to watch our interest? And there are other European countries as well who would lay claim, because as the ice would melt, there'll be more and more paths, there'll be more and more waterways. So how do we safeguard our interests in that area in the region of Arctic? That'll be a massive challenge unless we don't have a good, reasonable military. I doubt today here we are discussing, Trump, but still we are allies, and we're still hoping that yes, things would settle down with Trump. But imagine we have a very hostile world. Imagine China, Russia, we have to take on that, and US says, thanks, but no thanks, We know you're part of NATO, but why don't you deal your issues by yourself? Maybe you didn't support us in Iraq war area, and you're not supporting us in our challenges at a global level. US could have its own challenges. So at that point, Russia and China, how are we going to deal with them? So I've always said this, even right now the ballot question is becoming, which we'll talk later on, the ballot question is becoming, who is better suited to deal with Trump? Is it Mark Carney? He's getting, very good flying marks for that. 40% Canadians think Mark Carney would be best suited to deal with Trump. Then there's 26% for Pierre Poilievre. We'll talk about that, the liberal numbers, are they moving up or not? But I doubt even that is the ballot question. I think we need to have a visionary, a futuristic approach where from 2025 to 2030, this is what we need, a leader who can deal with what we have to do from 25 to 2030, and not just the leader. Who are we surrounding ourselves? The Prime Minister cannot do everything by himself or herself. He or she, they have to have very competent people around them. Is Mark Carney really surrounding himself with all those competent people? I need a brilliant finance minister. I need someone who can really handle our defense. I need someone who can really tackle the foreign policy matters. I need someone who really help me in the intergovernmental trade. Anita Anand, she's very competent. You mentioned her, but she's leaving. I'm not here to issue any certificates who is competent, yes or not, but Omar Al-Ghabra is leaving, Harjit Sajjan is leaving, Anita Anand is leaving. There are many others who are leaving, even Trudeau himself. You may or may not want to call him competent, yes or no, but he is also leaving. I think Liberals are still lucky enough that they have Mark Carney, They have Chrystia Freeland, they have Karina Gold, at least some sort of competence left there, but they will also have to have many other competent people. And here we talk about Pierre Poilievre. I mean, if I look at the candidates, I'll have to definitely ask him as well. I mean, give me the 20 people. If there is a cabinet of 30, give me the 20 people who will be really competent. And I haven't even spoken about 10 more important things. I know health is more of a provincial matter, but then we have to have a very good health minister who can really, you're transferring so much money with the health transfer, so you have to have a very competent person as a health minister. Minister of Sport, nobody knows who's the Minister of Sport. We're having the World Cup here next year. Where are we with the infrastructure? How are we going to tell our youth? We need to have heavy focus on innovation, on science, on AI, so that we are able to compete. And you're right, I mean, tomorrow we could wake up, all the artificial intelligence was developed in US. Okay, they invested billions and billions of dollars. Their companies invested that. Maybe the government is, facilitating that. But then by the time US will have one of the best AI technologies, everything patented, done, and they're ready. I mean, I read articles every day, the headline, 300 more days to go before AI. Yeah, I mean, the world changed after internet. After 300 days, AI is in full swing. If not at its peak, at least a much better version that we have today. I'm not saying it's going to happen after 300 days. There are so many articles that I read after 500 days, after 1,000 days, but whatever that would be. Are we prepared for 300 days or 500? I mean, I have to ask, are the Canadians asking these questions? This should be the ballot box question after 1,000 days. Okay, 1,000 days is probably just 3 years. So whoever forms the government, we have to ask, what is your plan that after 1,000 days, if we take an average, when AI, the world is going to change? I just attended a major program in Oakville. There was a town hall discussion. I was the moderator there as the fireside chat. We just had a 2-hour discussion on AI. We had Mr. Sam Petroda, who's known as the father of the telecom in India. He worked with 3 prime ministers. We were discussing artificial intelligence, the way it's going to shape up. He lives in US, and every other day he's witnessing what's happening in US. So we have to ask all these questions today. Yeah.
The United States is running one of the biggest deficits, right? And compared to Canada, it's, we're in a much better shape. But unfortunately, our deficit spending hasn't gone into what would have been infrastructure investments to be able to have that return on that investment. It's been going towards consumption, right? And so therefore, which doesn't do much when it comes to return on investment. So it's about the fine balance of where, what does that look like for Canada? Because right now, balancing the budget, it's, I don't know what the parties are going to say. We're going to be in a federal election. And what is that deficit spending going to look like in terms of making sure that Canada is ready to not just meet the challenges of what's happening in the United States, but in the world, because it is a changing world. What's happening in the United States, massive deficit, but they are attracting all the investments, right? When President Trump says, I'm going to have the lowest corporate taxes and manufacturing should come back, because he wants to go back to the days where there's jobs for the Americans, and therefore, if he's going to start cutting, corporate tax, income tax, all that stuff, where does the revenue come from? That's where the tariffs come from. To be able to have, that's why he's talked about having the External Revenue Agency as opposed to the IRS, right? So he's looking at it differently in that sense. And so what is Canada going to do? And it's not, and here's the thing, it's about being able to exist where you have your trading partners, but you're also very careful, right? Like, you're also very careful of your partners. You're also very careful about the trajectory of your country. Are you meeting the demands of the global economy? Are you educating your workforce? Are you attracting investments? Are you investing in infrastructure? Are you, when it comes to Canada as a place for immigration, are you attracting the right balance of investors who are coming to Canada for immigration versus others? What does that balance look like? Are you graduating people for jobs that exist in the future? Are you able to, these are all things that are so interdependent from one another. And so it's not, and I think that gone are the days where we say, oh, this is our trading partner, or this is we're, the G7 and it's fine, and we're always going to support ourselves. No, at the same time, we have to also see that as their leaders change, things also change. And I think this is something that we have to always keep in mind about how we're going to be with the U.S. and tomorrow with the U.K. and the other countries. Now, going forward to what is that vision? It's a very important one, because the way we've been going, we've been able to get along this far, and then what now is the question. So I think it's very critical on a federal election level that we do see very competent people who are running for elections. Now, Chrystia Freeland, very highly educated, from Oxford University, a very impressive CV, but unfortunately she was a big part of the problem of where we are today. A lot of it with her policies, right? Because of the positions that she's had in government, more specifically as finance minister and everything else. So it's also, are you competent in terms of, do you have the work experience, but also does your vision align? And unfortunately, we don't really know their visions until they're in government. We just hear the leader's vision in terms of the party, what their campaign looks like. And this is right now, you're right. Now, if we now talk about Canada is, yes, Ontario's an election, but on a federal level, we're in an election. We have CUSMA that's going to be renegotiated. It's timed, scheduled for next year, but of course that conversation is being moved up. What are some of the issues there is, that President Trump has raised? Canada has a lot of protectionist sort of policies in place, right? We have our supply management in place. What is that? That protects the dairy and the farmer industry to be able to, our eggs, our dairy, all of that is fixed at a certain price, right? We don't go with market terms. Sometimes it's been even said that we have like 200% sort of coverage on that, and the U.S. is saying no. Well, we want more access to some of the dairy farmers, as well as, why aren't you guys taking some of ours? Why don't we have that balance in trade? And we're very protectionist about that. This is something that was big in terms of that's. Supply management is massive in Quebec. It also affects a lot of Canadian farmers. So there's that. We have the telecom rules, right? Like when Freedom Mobile tried to come in, that was a massive problem with the three big carriers, TELUS, Bell, Rogers, when any foreigner telecom agencies want to come in. We have that case with our airlines. We don't allow airlines to come here. Yeah, we have a lot of budget airlines now compared to before, and some of them are kind of going out of business at the same time, but it's Air Canada all the way, and maybe some regional ones, like WestJet in certain areas and whatnot, but we don't allow them. Then we came up with the telecom tax, for social media, when it comes to, the tax, the digital tax on media, and therefore Facebook and the rest of them, Meta, came up with their policies because they're like, we're not going to pay. So, and Canadian banks, well, I mean, yeah, we didn't go through what the American banks went through with the recession in 2008. We were a lot more sheltered because we didn't follow the same sort of policies they did. That led to their crisis. But, there's, Citibank, but the way influx of with the brands I see, I have seen TD in the United States. I've seen, I started seeing CIBC. I started seeing a lot of BMO's there. Yeah. I mean, they say, okay, it's not the same. It's a brand, but at the end of the day, we have a lot of protections in place in Canada. So that's also a contention for President Trump, saying, hey, you guys have all these protections in place where you don't want us to come in. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have them. That is part of the bigger discussion of what are they, how do they protect Canada, and maybe because we've had this kick in the face, now if we go from a punch to a kick in the face, it's now maybe we have more protections in place. I don't know. This is a conversation I think we're all having, and also we want to see what these political parties have to now say in terms of what's their vision for Canada. And also 4 years is a long time. right? With this AI revolution, it's changing the way we work. A lot of people, we always used to think that when there's advancements in technology, that it's going to affect jobs that are very logical flow, like how we had bank machines, right? It replaced tellers. Then we had those checkout counters, right? It replaced again tellers. We thought it was going to be something that was going to be when factories started investing, and then the factory line workers, it started affecting them. So we always thought it was going to go into very technical, redundant sort of positions. We didn't think it was going to affect the creative sort of industry. And then the first thing, ChatGPT did was it hit the creative industry when it comes to people who write creatively, right? Who write ads, who write books, those are all creative positions. Like now you can go and ask it to write you a script for a film that would do really well in this genre, right? Those things we thought was always going to be that the robots weren't going to be able to take over. But now we saw that to be completely turned around. So also, are we graduating people for jobs that are going to exist not just this year, but in like half a decade, in a full decade? What does that look like, right? Are our universities equipped to do that, right? We've had now our universities are kind of having a big financial problem since the international students have been reduced. A lot of departments are closing down, right? And so we're in a very fast changing world, but we were supposed to always get here. If we're going to innovate, if we're going to do stuff, we're all like, the old ways usually crumble for a new way to come. Everything that's new is always disruptive, but it does create new markets. So you're right, what is the vision of that leader? What is the vision of that party? Do they have people that could form the cabinet? We're not like the United States where the president gets to put their cabinet together, right? They get to just nominate them and that's it. This is in Canada, we run candidates for federal elections, and as they win the number of seats, that they would form government, and from that caucus the prime minister gets to choose his cabinet. So now we got to look at the candidates who are running in all of the Canadian ridings and say, you're right. If we look at some of the parties, say, well, what do you guys have? Like, let's start with NDP, right? They're declining massively in every election. The federal NDP is declining. We're also seeing it provincially. In terms of the poll numbers, it's yet to be seen until February 27th, when there's the election here in Ontario. But, they're shrinking their seats. So now we look at the Conservatives, who've been the official opposition party since they lost majority in 2015 to the Liberals. It's like, the brand has now been around Pierre Poilievre, right? And in many ways, was that a good thing? Was that not? Well, there was a massive surge in terms of Conservative support in the last 2 years. We saw that more so that we've seen now why Trudeau's numbers fell for so long and him having to step down. But now, who are these candidates he's running? I think you even asked him, who are your top candidates who are going to take the position of Minister of Defense, Foreign Affairs, all of these very key strategic positions. And then when we look at the Liberals, well, I don't know if we want these same, right now, the Liberals have in many ways made a comeback when it comes to poll numbers because of this high level of activity. But do we feel comfortable with a Melanie Joly Foreign Affairs Minister? What did she accomplish? Do we feel comfortable with some of these, with Chrystia Freeland? She's hurting very badly in this, what we're seeing in terms of her support numbers from her own caucus members. So, again, whoever becomes the leader of the Liberal Party, who are they going to run? Who are they going to replace from the front benches? Well, not front benches, but in terms of their front candidates for an election cycle. So these are going to be very interesting times to see that, because fortunately and unfortunately, we have to elect them, right? And maybe that's a good thing, because then it's really up to the voters to decide.
Yeah, you made some very good points here, and I'd just like to remind our viewers here, if you look at the front page of Midweek, you will see that yes, we did do some exclusive interviews with different candidates, starting with Chrystia Freeland, the former Deputy Prime Minister and the former Finance Minister of Canada. I spoke to Chrystia Freeland about her future, about how she would handle the US tariffs and so many other things, and the question that you just posed, that why she wasn't endorsed by her cabinet colleagues, former cabinet colleagues, she's no more the cabinet minister, but why she wasn't endorsed. Not too many MPs have endorsed her, though she's still the one of the front runners, but Mark Carney has more endorsements. So one of the MPs who endorsed Mark Carney was George Chahal. We interviewed George Chahal as well. You spoke to Karina Gold. She's again cabinet minister and a leadership contender right now. So, and we also spoke with Ruby Sota, though that was a different topic. It was mostly on the foreign interference. We spoke at length for a good 1 hour. But all these interviews you can watch here right on Y Plus and Channel Y. Y Plus, of course, more because I like to remind our viewers once again, our 24/7 all English channel Y Plus. Please save in your favorites, because at Y Plus we will be covering US-Canada relationship, Y Media foreign policy, in which we'll be covering about how things are moving, and for US, China, India, Russia, what's happening in Middle East. We will be talking a lot more on Y Plus 24/7 all English channel. That yes, what's happening at the Liberal leadership race. We'll be talking about Ontario elections as well. So please save Y Plus in your favorites. In case you have any questions, you can call us at 416-475-5000. And we did talk about all these things. You're right. I mean, you're running deficits. But if you're creating an infrastructure which will last long, fine. At least, even if you are running deficits, you know the infrastructure is going to stay there. Whether it's the infrastructure in healthcare, infrastructure in education. When was the last time we built a world-class university? Why US or England or other countries are having world-class universities? Why don't we have any Yale, Oxford, Cambridge? Why don't we have that sort of university? We should think about that. Have we heard any leader discussing that on any panel? Any cabinet minister discussing that? Why don't we have world-class stadiums? 1976 was the last time we had the Summer Olympics here. When was the last time we thought that why can't we do Summer Olympics here? We don't have world-class infrastructure for education. Do we have world-class infrastructure for sports? No. We should be asking ourselves, do we have world-class hospitals? I mean, obviously there is always a shortage of physicians, nurses, so many other people. I mean, when you're going to an emergency department, what should be the wait time? Ideally, it should be 0. And then here we are. So healthcare, education, sports. Are we really attracting investment when it comes to tech? Are we really the hub of innovation? What was the last thing that we invented? So you're right, that yes, even if we are running deficit budgets, if the infrastructure is created, still it would make sense. You asked me what would be the policy in terms of, when are we going to start running surpluses? When are we going to be back in green? Last time I checked, the parties just said maybe 3 or 4 years from now. In 2019 and 2021, there wasn't much of a mention even. What is the target deadline to bring back our budget in surplus? So both the parties do not have any fixed time. They're not going to do it anytime soon. So we could be seeing deficits. I mean, we've seen the fall economic statement, which was late. I mean, it was not a fall economic statement. It was more like a newer economic statement. It got late till that point. And then the budget also, we saw that. So, and when you're talking, you touched another very important point. When you said, should we allow the US banks here in Canada? Let's step back and have a look at this thing. This has been a debate forever. When India got independence in 1947, their policies were very protectionist, and India went into its own shell. They were having a protectionist policy. West was all about, at that time, US, Europe, it was all about free market economy, free flow of trade, everything. And yes, they did well. And Pakistan, with the US support, also did well. Then China opened up. Of course, they had other things as well. SEZ, small economic zones, and China did so many other things in 70s, 80s, 90s. And as far as what I've read, history and economy, I have never seen any country rising that much in just 3 decades. What was the prime reason? Open market economy, one of the prime reasons, among others. Here's the debate. the question that you asked, should we opening up to US banks, as Trump is saying, or should we adopt more protectionist policies? Now, India definitely benefited in 90s when India started free trade agreements, open market economy, let's allow, other companies also come to India, whether it was the banking sector, the banks went there, auto giants went there, insurance companies, so many other big companies, they started going to India, investing over there, China. But then suddenly we saw the West and US, Brexit, and US and the West also thinking about protectionist policies. That happened during Bush, that happened during Obama. Trump 1 wasn't any different than the Trump 2. Then Kamala Harris, if she would have been in power, Joe Biden, he also started some sort of protectionist policies. And today we have Trump talking about tariff is my favorite word. What is that? It's a protectionist policy. Mm-hmm. So they're also rethinking, has the capitalism really served us well? Has the free market economy really served us well? Or it's making only the rich more richer and the middle class is being squeezed more and more and the poor are getting poorer. So that, there are so many articles on the net, we can read that. I've read quite a few of them. So that debate, you're right, will be on for Canada as well. What does Canada do from here on? Do we still adopt the protectionist policy? It's not about the banks, it's about the telecom as well.
It's telecoms, it's airlines, it's our supply management when it comes to our farming industry, for specifically dairy. Yeah. We have a lot of those things, and like even this digital tax that the Liberals put in place, right? It was because it was like to get compensated for the media. Right? It was like, oh, your platforms are sharing in, therefore there should be compensation and there should be a tax. And then the tech giants are like, no, well, we don't want to touch that then, right? So all those things have gone into place. But here's the thing, like it's not if there's tariffs and there's protectionist policies, that's not that's anti-capitalism. Yeah, the markets will dictate on anything, right? Right now, look. Everyone made a U-turn in the Liberal government when it comes to energy, right? Because the markets dictated, right? At the end of the day, you're like, we have, the fourth largest reserve of oil in the world, Canada, and we have one major customer that takes, 60% of their crude oil comes from Canada. And there are major customers. Yes, Canada has got other customers, but on a very smaller fraction. And then when our only customer says, threw this at us and says, we're going to put tariffs, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, it's going to hurt your industries, then all these guys turn around their ideologies that they swore by, that they got elected on, right? Because the markets will always dictate. If you're going to have a job, if you're going to earn, you got to listen to the market. Right? Are you right now in the business of servicing what the market needs? Right? Even on a small level, like if you work somewhere, did you get hired because you're able to offer a skill set and a level of service and quality, and that's why they hired you, and that's why your customers buy from you? If you're a small business, same thing. Are you meeting the demand of the market? Right? Whether it's in your products, whether it's obviously products and then service, and your customer service. This is the market will always dictate. And right now, it's like the election will be based on what the market will dictate, right? As the conversation has now turned, and not from axe the carbon tax or, don't vote for Trudeau. It's now shifted to who's best to deal with Trump, because, April 1st is a deadline where President Trump's administration is going to come back and show the deficit. The biggest deficit they're running is with China when it comes to trade. Like, it's massive. It's in those figures of what he was saying Canada is in, right? The 200 billion. Canada's not near that. But they're going to come back and they're going to show him, here's a list of countries where there's a deficit and what do we do, right? If he puts the tariffs. So we're not off the hook yet. Right? So if it's not the 25%, what is it? Or is it 25% plus? Right? And then there's CUSMA that needs to be renegotiated completely. And of course, these protectionist policies that we currently have in place will be also on the table probably as negotiation. So does Canada now have many hard years? Because if we're going to do the whole energy policy thing in terms of building the pipelines, that's going to be many years. And that's going to be if companies want to invest in Canada, the Canadian government do it, and that's many years. So is it going to be hard hit for many years, and then because we're investing and therefore there's going to be a return on investment, and then what do these years look like? That's going to be hard, right? This is a sobering conversation we all need to have. Also, how do we secure our relationships with other countries, right? And what do we have to offer? Let's just say the United Kingdom, when we're talking about bringing back that trade agreement. Since the UK left the EU, did their Brexit, Canada's been trying to have a trade agreement. It kind of fell apart last year. Now it seems like, Goodale is talking about it, in terms of bringing that relationship back. And I think there's a unity aspect that's going to play in here as President Trump goes and does his tariffs. And you know what? That's their country. They can do what they want. Because he has other means of, making sure that if he's going to, reduce property tax and corporate tax, he needs to bring the money from somewhere, right? And he's also attracting the investments, which is what Canada should be doing. How can we attract investments from foreign and as well as investing here? But I think this is also going to unite all the countries that are going to have the tariffs, right? So what's Canada's relationship with, we talked about UK, what is going to be Canada's relationship when it comes to the European Union, our allies there, what is it going to be when it comes to Australia and some of these other key places, right? And then even also looking at what is Canada's relationship with China, what is Canada's relationship with India. These are all critical things to, we can't ignore them. So that's going to be very important, and having someone who's going to be very competent on those files, right? I was thinking about the leaders that were elected who were not as competent on policy had the biggest scandals. And I could say that from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we all know that he's not very intellectual on policy. We've always known that, from the beginning. Right? And then we've seen kind of like when it gets away from them, their ministries and their staff will do whatever, and there's blunders, right? We're seeing that in a way with President Trump. He's not an intellectual on policy. He's a now, since the whole Gaza conversation and all, he's sounding more like the New York developer that he is, right? And what he did with Canada and negotiating and all of this stuff. He's the guy that makes the deals. He's not heavy on policy. That's why he's saying things. And if we go back to the picture of what he made that announcement about Gaza, you could see his chief of staff, her eyes are popping out, because people are like, what is he saying, right? Because policy. So that's when I could even say about Premier Ford. He's not intellectual on policy. That's why you see things go wrong, right? But Harper was very intellectual on policy. He had a tight grip on his government, right? How many scandals did the Harper government have? He was there for the same amount of time as Trudeau.
Not many that we know of.
There was one towards that 2015 election, which was his chief of staff gave a $90,000 loan to a senator because of the senator's spending or whatever had to pay back. It wasn't and a senator does not get elected in Canada. It's not like the United States. They get appointed for 25 years. So it wasn't like giving money to a riding, to an MP who's supposed to, it wasn't it wasn't also public funds going to somewhere that's not supposed to go to. It was just, okay, so that the biggest. There was a $12 orange juice. Orange juice. Right, $12 orange juice.
She had to resign.
And she had to resign. Right, so that was the most amount of scandals under a 10-year under Harper. Why? Because he was very policy in terms of intellectual. Right. Let's look at Obama. Policy-wise, very intellectual. How many scandals did he have? How many did he have?
Not many.
Right. So what I'm noticing is when we have a really great retail politician who's very good at just going into the public forum and talking, and perhaps maybe they're at the right place at the right time. When Trudeau came, he branded himself as sunny ways. what did he say? Budgets will balance themselves, and all the things he said, right? We all knew from the very beginning, right? And he sold the idea of the sunny ways, and he came after what, a lot of people after 10 years of any government, like what we've seen right now, he resigned at his 10-year mark, right? And President Trump, in his second term, came after 4 years of Biden and Kamala Harris and some of the madness that happened in that country. And we can go down the list of all the madness that happened in that country, right? So sometimes, and then Ford came in at a time of 15 years of liberal government. So sometimes you get these really great retail politicians that are able to say the right things and be able to be in public and connect with people, but they're not very good at policy. And then what happens when they take over government? So I think a big part of this is now like looking at how competent is a leader, because if they don't have their policy and intellectual, then it is going to affect all their different ministries, because they're not going to know.
A very good point. I would say this, that yes, the leader has to be competent himself or herself. And I've always mentioned, who is a leader. And for many, many years on my radio show, on my TV show, I'll always be mentioning 3 qualities I definitely want in a leader. Number 1, honest. And when I say honest, it doesn't simply mean fiscally. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't be taking bribes and you shouldn't be allowing anybody else to take bribes. But also, you should be honest with your commitment towards your country, to your people. That is what I say, honesty. So the leader should be honest. Second, courageous. Are you courageous enough to call spade a spade? Are you courageous enough to tell people that this is what is good for you? You may not elect me, that's fine. You just mentioned Harper, the niqab issue, that was one of them. A citizenship judge wanted to see the face of the person who's taking, and this is what the conservatives wanted to say, but it was given a spin that they are maybe anti-immigrants and they're bringing in a law that will send people back home. But they said, no, if you're a citizen, we're not going to deport you. No, that cannot happen. Yes, if you're a new immigrant and you've done something wrong and you could be, jailed for 2 or more years. So then, yes, if you're an immigrant or you haven't taken a PR, you could be sent back. And the niqab issue as well. So now what happens is you should have, I'm not saying it was right or wrong, I'm just saying. So I think you should have the courage, speak up your mind. If you think this is good for Canada, say that. How many leaders do we have today who can clearly speak up their mind on Israel versus Hamas? How many leaders do we have who can really speak up their mind on the US issue? Today we are talking about this. Why not before? I mean, if the Prime Minister can come out today that he was serious, Prime Minister should have told that earlier as well. But this guy was serious. So, honest, the leaders should be honest. The leaders should be courageous, number 2. And third and very important point, I've seen leaders who are honest. I've seen leaders who are courageous. But the third and the most important aspect that's missing in vast majority of the leaders, that's the vision. If you don't have the vision, and you're right, if you don't have the vision, let's make America great again. But what's your vision? Whatever I've been seeing, what Trump has been announcing up until now, is it going to benefit the Americans? I don't see that. You start owning Gaza. You've just said, okay, US will own Gaza. And we're going to send those people to a beautiful place where they won't want to come back from there. Which is that beautiful place? Nobody knows. And what are the people in Gaza really agreeing on that? That yes, you can send. And they've named Canada as one of the places. By the way, Canada has a cap on any Palestinian that we could bring from Palestine. Canada has a cap of 5,000 people. We're not going to bring 20,000. There are 2 million people there. Saudi Arabia has said no. Jordan has said no. Egypt has said no. So where are we going to build this beautiful place? And then you're saying Israel is going to do the fighting. Once the fighting is over, then US will own that place. So I don't understand how all this is going to benefit the Americans. So if we say this, the slogans are fine. X the tax, build the infrastructure, X the carbon. Okay, these are all slogans. Good. I'm not saying that you don't have a vision, but my question is, what is the vision that Pierre Poilievre is offering? I want to understand that. Mark Carney did great. Okay, you were the governor of Bank of Canada, Bank of England, fine. mean, you could have been, some people were, I know in one of his interviews he was asked, okay, is the US Fed the next one? Or, I've read in brief his book, Values, great reviews in England, Guardian, I've read those journalists. But are you really going to implement all this? What is the vision? What is your vision? That is what I want to understand. Unless you don't have that vision, I doubt even a house can be run. I mean, you have a wife, you have 2 kids, you have to have a vision. That, okay, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years from now onwards, will we have this house safe and intact? Will the mortgage be over? Will there be any investment properties? My kids, what is the inheritance I'm talking about? What am I going to pass on to my kids by the time they get married, they have their own kids? Am I really empowering them if I'm not giving them some sort of inheritance or some assets I'm not passing along? So a house of 4, or even husband, wife for that matter, you cannot run the affairs without a vision. And we're talking about running cities, we're talking about running provinces, we're talking about running countries. And I mean, people who are, the Prime Minister of Canada or any G7 country, if you're a President of United States of America, you're not just running your own country. I mean, you're managing global affairs. You just mentioned our foreign minister. I mean, there are so many things. I mean, what's our foreign policy for that matter? Our relationship is on its lowest ebb if we're talking about Russia, our relationship with China, our relationship with India, our relationship with Iran, our relationship with Saudi Arabia, and here comes US putting tariffs on us. What is our foreign policy? And here is US rolling out red carpet for India. There are allegations that India planned to kill a US citizen on US soil. But yeah, they've circumvented that issue, they've compartmentalized that issue, and still the Biden administration. I mean, here Globe and Mail gets an information, and I asked this question to George Shah, I've asked this to Ruby Sota, I've asked this to many of the leaders. I mean, when you're talking of foreign policy, you need to have a vision. Where are we heading? Globe and Mail gets information that a Canadian citizen was killed on Canadian soil, and it could be India behind that. Washington Post gets information that India is planning to kill a US citizen on US soil. Washington Post calls the White House, and Globe and Mail calls the Prime Minister office. The Prime Minister office, they say, give us, it's a national security issue, give us 72 hours. They say no. Okay, 48 hours? They say no. 24 hours. Globe and Mail, I know they're inventing that right now, their top bosses, Robert Five, he was the lead reporter there. But they said, okay, fine, we'll give you 24 hours. If it was a national security issue, then why did our Prime Minister Trudeau go on the floor the very next day and they stopped Globe and Mail for doing that? He said on the floor, fine, done. We've spoiled our relationships with India for a good amount of time. White House calls Modi, guys, this is what Washington Post is coming out tomorrow. This is important. They're not letting India off the hook. Good. If someone is conspiring to kill your citizen on your soil, no, you cannot let that go. So US didn't let go India off the hook. But what did they do? There is Department of Justice in place. There's NYPD. They're all doing their job. FBI is there. CIA is there. So they are making sure that India is held accountable. But this is the job of Department of Justice, and there are other departments who are taking care of all that. And here, we're still, Joe Biden, I'm coming to G20 summit. He goes there, attends G20 summit. Then he welcomes Modi in US. He's being again rolled the red carpet, and that's what's happening with Trump as well. Now here comes Trump administration. So Modi is all set for his tour to France and to US. With France, we'll talk about that in our next Y Media Newsroom, not today, but then, with France, they have so many deals, Rafale, and they have very strong ties with France, and they're building more and more stronger ties with US. I'm not saying Jai Shankar is the best of the foreign minister, but here he has a career diplomat, good experience in the West Bloc, and then S. Jai Shankar is elevated to become the foreign minister of India. Today, India can take a flight, visit Russia, and Putin is already doing that. I'm not talking this will happen, this has been happening. They go to Putin, red carpets are rolled out. The next flight is to Ukraine. Oh, we are giving you aid. And Ukraine's ministers, when they visit India, when Ukraine's ministers are asked, oh, India is buying oil from Russia, Ukraine's ministers don't even answer. They say, oh, that's for India to do, but India is giving us a lot of aid. So India is maintaining good ties with Ukraine, Russia. Here the minister goes to Iran, very good ties with Iran. They're taking over their Chabahar port. India says, okay, fine, don't bring in China. They're ready to invest billions of dollars. We want to build good ties with Iran, your Chabahar port. You need money, we'll give you money. 100 million, okay, we're investing. We'll take over Chabahar port. I know US is now, Trump is putting a lot of sanctions on Iran, and maybe he wants to bring Iran to the negotiating table that yes, let go your nuclear weapons program, and they're putting a lot of sanctions on Iran. Maybe there will be a clause that the Chabahar port also, India could face challenges. But for now, India is maintaining a good relationship there as well. They're trying to have good relations with China. They've had many meetings, direct flights, and more trade relations. China is India's largest trading partners. They have excellent relation with Japan, good relationship with Australia because they're part of the Quad. The Quad summit will happen in India. Trump will go to India this year for sure because Quad has India, Japan, US and Australia. So the Quad summit will be happening there. And last time it was Trump who revived the Quad. It was Trump who revived the Quad. So the vision has to be there. I mean, if you are becoming an MP, tomorrow you could be the cabinet minister. I also want to ask you about the Gaza thing. Is it, I mean, you're right, I mean, the rise popping out, there are question marks, what's happening. Is it a viable thing or, I mean, those 20 billion people, I feel, I mean, as much as we're talking about Hamas, whatever Hamas did is horrible. We all condemn that violence. Any sort of violence has to be condemned. And if we have to talk about Hamas, we'll also have to talk about Israel as well. I mean, they are also, they've been doing a lot of violence there. But here is US talking about Gaza, that we will own Gaza, flatten everything. And he also created, that's going to create so many jobs for people in the area. So people in the area, I mean, these guys, he's already planning to move them out at a beautiful place, which you don't know. Please.
So to just before I go into that, I want to respond to about India, and from the question of the end game in terms of if somebody wants to purchase your house and you don't want to sell it, and the only way you're forced is when you haven't been running your finances and you haven't been able to maintain the property. When you lay out what India's been able to do in terms of have conflicting relationships, right, with countries that don't get along, be able to buy, Russian oil at a discount during the war as long as they provide aid. And they didn't even join the Paris Accord. Do you remember when everybody in 2015 said, climate change, and they said, no, we have a developing country and we can't right now commit to that. They've been emitting, and yet they still have those relationships. So you're right. It's the question is, how are they able to have all these key relationships that conflict with where the world is going, where human rights are going, human rights violations, and all those things where, Canada likes to be able to pride itself to say, we have human rights, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. So you're right, it's a massive shift in terms of how can, where do you draw the line of operating in such a way where you're trading with countries that have massive human rights violations, and then yet you're still able to hold, relations with other countries? Is it because they invested in their infrastructure? Did they invest in the education of their people? Did they invest in exporting? I mean, majority of H-1B visas in the United States from India. I mean, what have they been doing, in terms of with their infrastructure, with their education, the rapid pace of how they're moving forward, that they can afford to do these things and no one can say, no, sorry, we don't want to deal with you. So that's very interesting. Now, when we go to what was announced, so it was one day there's going to be tariffs on Canada and the Canadian economy, going into a recession. And then the next day it was, okay, there's going to be a delay for 30 days. And then it was the announcement of the Gaza And I think if you even look at his chief of staff, if you take a picture of, Prime Minister of Israel there, and then you have, everyone's shocked with what President Trump is saying. And so here's the thing. He said, he said Gaza, 2 million people, 1.8, 1.9, 2 million, let's just say. They have nothing to go back to. Let's move them out. Saudi can take it, and Egypt, and Jordan. And of course they all came back and said no. And then he started sounding like the New York developer that he is, which is, it's going to be the Riviera of the Middle East. It's going to be so beautiful. It's got the best climate. It's going to be this. It's going to have casinos and hotels and jobs. And, he's talking about it in such a casual way. And it also makes you realize that, again, like we talked about, he's not very, intellectual in policy. When I mean by policy is vision, because how do you implement a vision? You need to have policies to be able to do that and understand how you would do that. It's as if President Trump, and even in his first administration, but now, watching what he's done in just 3 weeks, he floats ideas around. He just says it without taking into consideration the laws in place, the policies, the history, like the history of Canada, U.S., the history of Gaza, the Palestinians, the Israelis. It's like in a very unemotional manner, without any sort of shame, I guess, or understanding or of history or foreign policy. He just floats ideas around. And he's almost doing like a live survey, a live poll. Because his government's always like, no, we can't do this. They'll start speaking up. And they said, because he said, we'll use U.S. military. They said, no, we won't, right? And it's as if this is his working style. He kind of throws a whole bunch of stuff out there, and he sees what sticks and what doesn't. And then he kind of sees people's reaction. One thing he's really good at, that I have to say that governments and politicians, majority of them are not good at, is they don't listen to the people. President Trump, like we know from his first administration, he would watch Fox News, right? Like he would go on back then on Facebook and Twitter and just like comment on things, right? He was like roll off policy ideas on his social media, and it would just make everything like spin. And the market, the stock market would either plunge or like it was chaotic, and he's still very chaotic. But one thing I know, I went to some of his rallies, I watched him, and even just watching how he does things is he'll see what the pain points are, and then he ran his election on a very protectionist policy, America first. Now he's coming out with a lot of foreign policy to say, I'm going to send my troops to Gaza. That he was the one who campaigned on, we don't want to give money to other countries. We don't want to send our troops. We don't want to be in wars. We don't want to be this. And he's just kind of like saying now very casually. And then...
But he's clarified on that he's not going to send troops on that one.
Yeah, he said it, and then when there was pushback, he just... One thing about him is, for people who are on edge, and and me included to some degree, right? Because he's very like alarming with the things he does. I would say, let's take a few deep breaths, right? And because he's going to say something else tomorrow or in 5 minutes from now, and someone else is going to be in the shooting range. It was first Canada and Mexico. Within 24 hours, then it was just all of a sudden it was the Gaza Strip, it was the Palestinians, and then he also lined up, Saudi, Egypt, and Jordan right at the same thing. It's like, you have to take them, and nobody and then this is after the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is very fragile. We all know, he even said it's very fragile. I don't know how long it's going to last for. It's headlines, and then on top of that, you say this. You don't think that's going to escalate the tensions even more, right? But I think he doesn't really care. Like, in a sense, like, it doesn't sound like someone who's like really emotionally invested in any of this stuff. He's kind of just seeing, what am I going to say to see what the people think? who's going to go with this and what leverage do I have to push? Obviously, you had, immediately a lot of the conservative Israelis very up for the idea because they're like, oh, they'll solve a lot of problems. Of course, the Palestinians are saying, what are you talking about? You want us to leave our homeland? This is where we live. We're coming back. And then what does that do with Hamas? Escalation. What does that do with Iran? What does that do with all of these different, and it's so he's kind of like a bull in a china shop, and he's just going to do and say things. And then, and one thing very interesting about him is, I was really thinking about this. I was like, he says things and then he sees if there's appetite for it. Will this change policy? How much leverage do I have to coerce this country versus that country? Like, you know what I mean? Like, he came down that escalator, over 10 years ago, and, when he announced he was going to run, and nobody thought he had any chance. And he said, I'm going to build a wall. Well, I was thinking about it when the president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, said, I'm going to send 10,000 troops to the border of Mexico and the United States. That's his wall. Because he said, I'm going to build a wall and they're going to pay for it. Who do you think's paying for that military at the border?
I think that was already there.
Well, there was the wall, but then they didn't develop it. No, she just sent 10,000 troops. That's going to stay there, not for 30 days. Infinitely stay there. That is your wall. And that is Mexico paying for it. So it's kind of like he's saying things, and then it sounds bizarre 10 years ago, and then somehow the political landscape changes of certain things, and so he got that wall. In many degrees, now he's got a secure wall because you got the troops there, right, with their commitments. At the same time, we have to look at President Trump as somebody who knows this is his last term, right? Like, Constitution doesn't allow him to run a third election, for a third term. And so we know that he knows none of his kids could step up. Like, I believe they're the new Kennedys now. Like, if any of his children wanted to run, like right now with Marco Rubio, who's left, Florida, I think if like Don Jr. wants to run, he probably could, They have a brand that's there that will live beyond him. But can any of his children become president? I don't think so, right? They don't carry the same way that he does. And I was also looking at everybody who supported him in the first administration. All their careers are like ruined. Think about it, like from Pence to Rudy Giuliani to
Steve Bannon.
Yeah, like they went through tremendous hardship, legally, financially, but also politically, right? Even the governor of New Jersey, what was his name?
Michael Cohen, and so
yeah,
many.
Yeah, the list is long. The list is long, and because it made me think about why wasn't Ivanka Trump part of his campaign, right? I mean, she was massively there for the first administration, and then her and her husband, Jared Kushner, were part of that. And then in this last election campaign, they weren't. But mind you, on J6, they were interviewed, right? They were ostracized by the elites in New York, the socialites, and they were kind of completely ostracized. But at the same time, then in this election cycle, he had his sons a little bit more front facing, and then his daughter-in-law, who became the co-chair of the Republican party convention, and co-chair, and that she did a really great job, and now she's got a position at Fox News. But now when you look at where did Jared Kushner was the one who had proposed the idea of the development in Gaza back when he was there when he was on that file in Trump's first administration. So right now he's echoing something Jared Kushner was envisioning, right? But Jared Kushner is right now managing a fund of billions of dollars. I think it's about like $4 billion. I have to double check the numbers, but it's from the sovereign fund of Saudi Arabia and a few of these other Middle Eastern countries. And so we know that he's a development guy, he's a business guy, and I think what they're kind of doing is now that they're out of the spotlight, there's no like, you can't really say, you know, with Ivanka and Jared Kushner out of the way politically, you can't really say that we don't know what they're doing because they're no longer in the White House. So whatever they're doing with that fund and how are they investing, that's that. He launched his meme coin 2 days before, or a few days before he took office, his inauguration. The day before he took office, Melania Trump launched her meme coin. They went through the roof with, you know, billions of dollars. We don't know that money come from which countries. Because now if Putin buys your coin, you don't know, right? He goes to Mar-a-Lago over the weekends. We won't, because it's his home, we don't know who visits him there, whereas if they have to visit the White House, that would be public records. So he's doing politics very differently and very openly, like, you know, like before where we think it's a conflict of interest. I remember in the first administration, Ivanka Trump had to, you know, get rid of her clothing line and Melania, her jewelry line. They kind of had to walk away from it so there wouldn't be a conflict of interest. Now they're like launching meme coins. Melania Trump just took a deal with Netflix for $400 million for her biography. It's like very openly, you know, Meta just gave him, $25 million because of the lawsuit he had on that. And so it's just, and it's going to go towards building his library. Right now it's just like, I'm going to get paid and are you going to pay me? And not just for the country through tariffs or whatever, but also the Trump brand in terms of paying directly. And it's just right in your face. You can't, you know, can't look away, and he's doing it. And is someone going to do something about it? Are they going to say anything? I know the Democrats are starting their impeachment process again, right? And this is very, very recent. So all of these things are happening, right? And we all see it, okay? And then he's also at the same time as doing all of these things, he's doing the things he promised the American people he would do, right? What are they doing now? With Elon Musk, now he's the special government employee, having access to all these records. They wanted to reduce federal government employees by 10% because they're like, we need to be efficient. This is the concept of DOGE, right? The government efficiency department. And now they've only had I think the last number was like 65,000 federal employees have now agreed to take the package to exit. And then that's about 3% of, so they were looking at 5 to 10%, so we'll see where there was a deadline. I think the judge pushed the deadline. So there's a lot of changes happening. He cut foreign aid, he cut DEI, he cut all of these different things. He's deported, I think within the first week he deported like 1,000 people, right? Whereas America had a massive problem. They had 20 million illegal border crossers. That's a big number. When your military is like 1.5 million and you have 20 million in your country that you can't. So, you know, he's moving fast on a lot of the things he promised the American people. But then he's also doing all this other stuff that was not part of his election platform. But that's why day one, he went and signed all those executive orders. Like he signed like thousands. He reversed everything, and at the same time, we're seeing somebody who's like, he just pulled the security sort of briefing for Biden because Biden did it to him, right? He pulled, he's done all these things, right? He's just, and so I think what he's looking at is like, he's like, okay, I got 4 years. My kids aren't going to be president. I don't think they can. They could be maybe governor or Senate or whatever, House of Representative. So how am I going to make sure there's generational wealth? Like generational wealth, not like, you know, not a few decades of wealth. We're talking about generational wealth. And he can. Does that mean he's going to start through those funds, through, you know, the kids and the ones that are not involved in government? Do they now go purchase like land where there is natural resources? So maybe they're not the developers of natural resources, but they own the land. Like, and they contract it out. Like, there's all kinds of things that, you know, I think he's kind of looking at, and it's all up for grabs because who's going to say otherwise? I mean, on the first day when he was inaugurated, he released, you know, the 1,500 people from J6, right, out of jail. So you do that, and then you have all those diehard people who are your own army. Like they're the Trump army. And if you've heard any of their interviews, they said, we die for that man. We do anything he's patriotic towards Trump. And then that's 1,500 people. And then you take their friends and family who would probably support them. And then you multiply that number. So, in many ways, he's kind of like hedged all his bets in terms of what he's doing. And he's very strategic about it, even though he looks very chaotic. And maybe you take some, you lose some in terms of what he's saying. But I think it's also setting a precedence of how to do things. Like if he's talking this openly about, Greenland and Canada and Gaza, what does that mean for China when it comes to Taiwan? What does it mean for right now Russia and Ukraine? Because it's setting a different tone of kind of like survival of the fittest. And so these are times that, we didn't think was going to happen, but since we're in it, where does Canada sit in all of this, and how does Canada operate in this new way of doing things?
Yeah, you made some very good points here, and you're right. First things first, Canada definitely has to figure out not just how do we deal with Trump. I mean, it's a pause. Still, it's not over. It's just a 30-day pause. So we need to figure out in short term what Canada is going to do. Then, of course, the long-term planning. And as you were right, the vision actually, I would say the vision actually comes from so many different things. First things first, the leaders have to have clarity of mind. I mean, where do you want to take Canada? We all have to ask this question. I mean, if someone says, I want to become a member parliament for this country, then you have to ask that person. You could be the next cabinet minister, or someday a member parliament would eventually become the leader of a party, and they could always become the prime minister as well. So I think first things first, anyone who wants to become a member parliament, member provincial parliament, or even for that matter, a regional councillor or a mayor of the city, you have to ask all of them, what is your vision? And vision comes from clarity of mind, number one, that you should have clarity of mind. Where do you want to take a city, province, or a country for that matter? Secondly, I think vision comes from, as you're right, you have to have a very good intellectual strength. I mean, if I do not understand artificial intelligence well enough, if I do not understand, I will not have a vision for that. I have to lay out a vision. What actually is artificial intelligence? What is the time it's going to peak? How is it going to affect us? Should we invest in this thing? How much should we invest? How can we attract capital? How can we work so that artificial intelligence works to our advantage? So there is so many things. That is what encompasses a vision. Second, as you were saying, I mean, I won't go into too much details, but Jared Kushner and Ivanka, I know they have their own things going on. She's releasing her yoga videos or exercise videos, and she kind of stayed away from the spotlight. And there was a lot of discussion on that as well. Why would she be away from the spotlight as well? You're talking about media. Yeah, I mean, one thing I just wanted to say this. Here we had Rupert Murdoch sitting in White House, and Trump was all praise for him. Rupert is a great guy. Rupert is this, and then the next thing a journalist asks, in today's Wall Street, they're saying, I mean, tariffs are the worst thing that you're saying. This is Wall Street, and you have Rupert sitting over here, and you're saying Rupert is a great guy, and tariffs will work against U.S. This is what Wall Street's today's print edition says. And then Trump was answering, it's not that Rupert and I agree all the time. Sometimes we do disagree on certain things. But the point being that, yes, with due respect, I'm saying, I mean, media giants, whether it's Jeff Bezos with the Washington Post or Rupert Murdoch with Wall Street Journal, or you were talking about Fox News, that's where the conversation triggered, or CNN. I mean, 99% of the programs you watch on MSNBC, 99% of the programs you watch on CNN, they would be picking up on Trump and his policies. 99%. Every single cabinet minister, this is not, I'm not saying they're right or wrong. No, I won't say that. But you could easily see MSNBC and CNN on this side. Mm-hmm. And on this side, we could easily see on this side Fox, almost every single thing that Trump would do. And by the way, our team is in US, and I just wanted to show you a quick glimpse of that. And our team is also sensing the same thing. He says, One of the things that I've seen in US, when they look at media, I mean, they want to ask us, which side are you on? And you can easily sense that, yes, people want, even being a media, we should be staying very objective and very, very objective, but they will want to ask us, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican media? That's what most of the people want to sense, or that's their question. So have a listen what we're doing there in US. Our team is in US these days, so we will be carrying lots of coverage from US, from border to border, from city to city, from Windsor to Detroit, from Detroit to Chicago, and many other cities in US. We will be doing lots of coverage from Canada to US. Stay tuned with Y Media, and most of this coverage would be on Y+. Y Media's channel, Y+, a 24/7 all-English channel. Let's have a listen.
Hello everyone, this is Shubi from Y Media Group. Y Media is at ground zero at the US-Canada border. We will be covering a variety of topics from Toronto to Windsor, Windsor to Detroit, Detroit to Michigan City, and Michigan City to Chicago. The topics that we're planning on covering are US-Canada relations, as there's a lot going on with that right now. We're looking at the trade war between Canada and US and asking questions on both the Canada side and the US side. We're also going to be asking about Trump and his policies. What are people's thoughts? So stay tuned to all Y Media platforms, whether that's Channel Y 24/7, Radio Y, Y+, our all English 24/7 channel, or the biggest free English newspaper in Canada, the midweek newspaper. Please don't forget to pick up your copy. All the coverage will be splashed across our platforms. Stay tuned.
So that was Shubi and our Y Media team there in US, and we're going to get you lots of coverage from US. Our team is there in different parts of the city. What's happening there at the border on the Canadian side? What are the Canadians talking about tariffs and Trump and US on the Canadian side of the border? And then we'll definitely take you on the other side of the border, from Toronto to Windsor to Detroit to different cities in Michigan to Chicago. We are going to give you lots of coverage right here at Y Media. I want to bring you back here, the Liberal leadership race. We definitely know there are three frontrunners, and by the way, all the three frontrunners and their supporters, you are going to see lots of interviews right here on Channel Y and Y+, our 24/7 all English channel. More on Y+, because we're covering lots of other issues on Channel Y as well. There's elections happening in different states in India. There's a lot of discussion on India and Punjab, and there are so many things. The Champions Trophy cricket, we're going to cover a lot that on Channel Y, but on Y+, it's more of other issues. I want to talk about the Liberal leadership race, and then we'll come down to Ontario elections, and then we'll call it a day. But Liberal leadership race, what's your take?
Well, right now there are 5 candidates, and they just met one of their funding requirements, which was like $120,000, and then $125,000, and then they have another one coming up soon. And they just announced their debate date. French one is on February 24th. English one is on February 25th. I think everybody wants to be able to see the debates, to see because this is not just to become the leader of the Liberal Party. This is to become prime minister before they go into an election. And we've seen that with there's 2 front runners, and then Karina being Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland. Mark Carney has I think around 64 endorsements by cabinet, and not cabinet, sorry, caucus. This is Liberal MPs, which you would think that they're able to then get the votes that are needed, because the way the election works, I'll break down how the voting system works. And Chrystia Freeland has 26, I think, so less than half. And then Karina Gold has 2, and if that's any indication of support. And then we have another 2 MPs that are in there, previous MPs, Frank Baylis and Ruby Dalla. So they all met their requirements to be able to make their payments. And so we'll hear the final list. What's to be had? Okay, so we know that there's 4,000 members that signed up to take part of this election process. The Liberals do not have a membership fee like the Conservatives. You have to pay $15 for a membership annually, whereas this was free. So they were able to do their massive run of 400,000. I know they raised a lot of money as well, so that's money going back into the to the Liberal Party, getting them election ready. Now, Mark Carney seems to be, in terms of, in many ways, when it comes to polls, a front runner. Why so? Because the latest poll that came out was, who's best to negotiate with President Trump. Mark Carney beat Chrystia Freeland, who previously was part of the negotiation in first administration for NAFTA 2.0, which we have Kuzma. She was Foreign Affairs Minister then, and she was a big part of that. But, they see him even more than Pierre Poilievre, who has been doing really well in the polls for the past 2 years against Justin Trudeau. The conversation's shifted. So what does that mean? This also means that the Liberals, in a way, have made a comeback when it comes to the polls. Where so? They're doing really well in Quebec. So the Bloc Québécois numbers are down because where is the Liberal votes coming from in terms of I'm talking about just polls, like survey. I'm not talking about an election because we're not in an election yet. The Conservatives are very consistent at 45% or 40%, and you have a surge with the Liberals, only with one of the polls 6 points down, and it's coming from NDP vote and it's coming from Bloc Quebec votes. And this is, and I predicted this when I start seeing how things are shifting. This could be a coalition election where you would see maybe NDP votes or Bloc Quebec votes coming back to the Liberals or going for the Liberals because it's going to be really a two-party race. This is all because of President Trump. It's changed the narrative on so many things. It changed who the prime minister is. It changed the election process. It changed the official opposition, the Conservatives, what they were going to plan to run a campaign on. Even more so that on next Saturday, February 15th, the Conservatives are doing a massive rally. We haven't seen a rally on the Conservative side for quite some time, and they're asking all their candidates in whichever ridings they have to be able to bring bus loads of people, to probably want to have a few thousand people in Ottawa for Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservatives, to really relaunch what their election is going to be about. All this is taking place while you have Jagmeet Singh trying to come on the air, talking about what he would do when it comes to tariffs. But all this is happening where we've only seen Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney do interviews about what they would do. Mark Carney said, we're not going to have a consumer carbon tax. There's going to be more on the industries, so I would imagine it would be the energy industry. I'm not sure, he didn't go into too many details about that. Chrystia Freeland again said no consumer carbon tax, so that's completely off the table. Mark Carney's talking about, kind of having that same sort of attitude, and same as Chrystia Freeland in terms of, Canada's not for sale, we're not going to do any of this, we're going to stand up to the bully. And since February 1st, when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement of Canadian tariffs, on American goods, we've seen that Chrystia Freeland has now come back, as well as Mark Carney, and they're saying we support with whatever the government is saying. So we don't know. So here's the thing. Why is Mark Carney doing so well in the polls when it comes to the person who's best to negotiate with Trump, including Pierre Poilievre and Chrystia Freeland and the rest of them, is because he's got a very impressive CV, right? A very impressive resume. Here's why. He was, Bank of Canada governor, Bank of England governor, at a time where Stephen Harper, tapped him in 2008. That was during the massive recession, right? The United States economy, was in turmoil. Canada wasn't as far bad in comparison, but we saw what happened in Europe and everywhere else. So, Stephen Harper is one of the co-founders, or you almost forget about Peter MacKay in that scenario, but really, merging the parties on the right, with the Conservative Party, then becoming Prime Minister and just kind of being very fiscally responsible. And now he got the stamp of, it was Prime Minister Stephen Harper who put Carney in a critical time, right? So there's that thing he has. and Mark Carney comes off as a very serious person, obviously very intellectual in that sense, policy-wise. What are his policies? We have to obviously know. I think the debate will help us understand more of his policies on a broader scheme. But, he's, Harvard graduate, Oxford University graduate, master's, PhD in economics, very impressive. So perhaps this is a time where people are saying, well, we care about the economy and who's the best person to understand the economy and lead Canada, which is maybe perhaps why he's doing so well. Mind you, this is before we've heard him in a debate. We haven't seen him in any of these things. So we very much look forward to that. And it'll be very interesting to know where will his poll numbers be in the Liberal Party leadership, as well as compared to the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre and the rest of them, after he does his debates. But in March 9th, there's going to be a new prime minister, and that's just around the corner. So this could, go anyway.
Yeah, very good points that you've made. I'll start with, the poll numbers that are being discussed. I'll start with this thing that yes, if I can recall, right at the start of this year when Prime Minister Trudeau didn't announce his resignation. At that time, the Conservatives, one of the polls that I saw, Conservatives 45%, and the Liberals were at 19%. I said, just like we had the Ontario Liberals decimated in two back-to-back elections, I thought the federal Liberals are going to be decimated this time. If you look at the polls, 45% at that time for the Conservatives and 19% for the Liberals. Fast forward that, Trudeau has resigned, Mark Carney is in the leadership race, he's the front runner, and here we have Donald Trump threatening with tariffs, 51st state, and all these things. And another poll survey comes, which says Mark Carney is the most suited person for dealing with Trump, with 40% support from the Canadians. We're not talking Liberals here, from the Canadians. Okay. And a distant second, Pierre Poilievre is not 38 or 39 or 35. He's a distant second with 25%. And then distant third is Chrystia Freeland. So if you ask Canadians today, most of them would say that to deal with Trump, you have Mark Carney. Why this poll is very important? Because the question is very important. I think the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre in particular, they're trying to get back into the conversation because they've been ejected out because the carbon tax, nobody's talking about that. And I think they plan that we'll make this a carbon tax election. Why don't we have a carbon tax election today? That was Pierre Poilievre saying a couple of months ago. So this election is not going to be a carbon tax election anymore. And then with capital gain tax, Mark Carney says, we're not going to put that. We're going to take that away. Fine. The government has already said they're going to delay it to 2026. So it's not going to be implemented this year, June. It's been delayed. So they know that by 1st Jan 2026, there will be an election. There'll be new government. They'll say, okay, fine, we don't want the capital gains tax. So I think now the Conservatives, they have to ask themselves, what are they going to do? That is why they're doing this rally. Let's, make Canada great again, Canada first. So they're talking about that. But Mark Carney will also say, I'm better equipped than you, or Chrystia Freeland would say, I'm better equipped than you to take care of Canada. So in particularly Mark Carney. So that's the question I think the federal Conservatives will have to address at this time.
Yeah. They've been ejected out of the conversation, because the House is prorogued. So therefore, there is no debates being had right now. Being in the House would have given Pierre Poilievre a platform, right? And as well as Jagmeet Singh, which is why now they're doing press conferences since this all has gone down. And then just recently, there was a press conference that Pierre Poilievre had in Vancouver, and where he talked about wanting to send the military to the border, and then also having maximum minimum sentences for fentanyl, like whether if you're distributing and selling it, and just kind of being tough on crime, and then also addressing the border. But again, it sort of didn't really go anywhere because I think at this time, Canadians are saying, okay, yeah, fentanyl is an issue, but then, there's the border measures and all this and that. Do we need, harder sentencing, for that. That's to be seen. I mean, because it is such a fast news cycle and there's so much new things happening that it's very hard to capture more than 5 minutes of airtime, right? Especially if you're not in the House and especially if you're not in the governing position, and so you get canceled out of the public view of things. And so you're right. Now there's the rally, which is said, it's a Free Canada rally and wear white and red for Canadian colors. And this is going to be the rally where he's expected to now relaunch the sort of what the campaign is going to be about, what the Conservatives will do, and kind of create a momentum. Because think about it, all the Conservative base that have been, building this momentum it's been silent for a few weeks. And it's not just any few weeks, it's the few weeks where Donald Trump is in office, few weeks, not just a regular few weeks. This is like fast-paced news cycle few weeks of so much happening. Now, who this past week, all we can talk about is on a weekly basis, who are the winners? I think on his exit, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he's clearly one of the winners because he was able to stand tough against President Trump, and he kind of had all the Liberals rallied behind him. But also nationally, Canadians are more patriotic, right? Because they do not like the rhetoric coming from President Trump. So in a way, during times of crisis, usually the country comes together. So he's been doing well, and he's been so active, right, with the Canada-U.S. summit, going over to maybe a little bit late, but he's now in Europe and he's very active around all of this, right? So it goes to show, okay, while he's being active, the Liberal Party is doing their thing in terms of replacing him, and he's taking care of the front line, and we don't have to hear from the candidates, right, of whatever they're doing until there's a debate. So he's a winner of this week. Who's another winner? It's Mark Carney, obviously, given the poll that you just mentioned, because people are kind of tuning in saying, oh, he seems to be the most experienced. Now, when you compare that to somebody like Pierre Poilievre, who was so high in the polls for so long, one of the things that the media keeps asking now about is, okay, well, who is, like you said, who's going to be in your front benches, in your cabinet, who are going to be able to take us through this times if you win. Also, what is your election going to be about in terms of now it's no longer about carbon tax or, don't vote for Trudeau. But the other thing is when you compare the CVs of, Pierre Poilievre and somebody like Mark Carney, then it's massively different, right? Pierre Poilievre has been an MP since, around the age of 25, really graduating from university and winning 7 elections. 7 elections is a lot to win. Goes to show he's got the support. Goes to show that he understands the way government works. It also goes to show he understands, because you need to understand how government works and policies. But are Canadians looking for life experience outside of government to be able to navigate? And has the election and the re-election of Donald Trump, somebody who was never in government, he was never a senator, he was never a governor, he was never even a House of Representative, he was never, a mayor, he was never any of those things, never a counselor, never anything, and he went from being in business to becoming president. And so now they're saying, okay, well, that can be done. That's why somebody like Mark Carney, who's never been elected, he's branding himself not a politician because he's never held office in terms of getting elected. And so now they're saying, and they asked him, said, well, would you be ready? And he said, well, I've always come in at the top job. Because they said, well, what makes you think you could do this, right? That was one of the questions. You've never been in government. And he said, no, I've been governor, but in Canada I came in at a high level. And so Donald Trump's kind of set the precedence on that in terms of not being government and becoming president and having such a massive majority in the last election. So some of Pierre Poilievre's challenges are going to be, he's been in, 7 elections. He's been in government for so long. Where is his private, market experience come from? Does he understand the way the markets work? He's never, run a business. He's never hired people. So this is going to be a challenge in terms of, when you compare that for Canadians who want the ideas, who want the vision, and who want to have the resume and the experience to follow it, right? Because anybody can say a lot of good things, but do you have what it takes? And being in the private sector, you eat what you earn, right? Like if you don't earn a certain month, you don't eat, right? And then if you have employees, you make sure they eat first before you eat, right? So then it builds in a certain level of understanding of what the common person is saying to you when you're governing a country. 70% of people are employed by small business. Very small percentage of people are employed by mega corporations, right? If you're not a government worker, you're either you're self-earning, right? You're an entrepreneur. Yeah, let's say you're a small business owner, but you're really the operator and the owner, or you have a small team. And so if 70% of people are employed by small business, you need to understand what they're talking about. When Karina Gold says, we haven't been listening to you, well, you need someone who can listen to you, right? Because they understand you. Like right now, if an immigrant comes into this and talks to you, you understand what he's saying or she's saying because you were once an immigrant, right? If a small business owner comes and talks to you, you understand the challenges that they need to make sure that their employees eat before they eat, right? You understand these challenges because you've had the hard-earned experience in it. So this is going to be one of the challenges for not just the vision and understanding like policy on an intellectual level and governing, but also do you have the experience and when you have experience, you have empathy. You really do have empathy when you have experience because you've been there, you've been in those shoes. Therefore, you know what it takes. I know one of your key points is, whenever you have somebody who's working, and you always ask them, are you driving? Are you taking the bus? Did you eat? And that's something critical, like where you'll go out of your way to drive someone home even if they live far away because it's winter time. There was a time where you had to wait for bus in this winter. These are things that just become part of your DNA eventually because you have that experience and it gives you the empathy and the understanding. So I think that's what Canadians are also looking forward to, who's got that, right? Without the cushion of, obviously, certain experiences.
Yeah. I wish we had more time, but we will carry on this discussion next week because all these topics, I don't think so any of these topics are going to go away. And next week we will also have more discussions on Y Media Foreign Policy Report, especially by that time we are going to give you a lot of coverage on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to US and France as well. So there's going to be an AI summit in France. So what's happening there in France? What is this AI summit happening in France? What's going to happen with India and France relationships? What's going to happen with India and US relationships? So lots more to come right here on Y Plus and Channel Y. Other than that, I'd like to once again remind you, we are having lots of interviews on 24/7 All English Channel Y Plus. So please do save in your favorites, 24/7 All English Channel Y Plus, and our 24/7 Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu and English channel, Channel Y is always there for you. Any information that you need on programming or anything else, 416-475-5000. We're going to take a very short break, and after this very short break, you will be seeing our coverage of Y Media Political Sensex on Delhi elections, and then lots of local news and news from India. So thank you so much, Ramana ji. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, this is Priyanka Chopra and you're watching Channel Y.
The biggest South Asian media group, Y Media.
Y Media Group.